Here. So hello and welcome to the YWCA Central Massachusetts Racial and Gender Equity. This is our Lunch and Learn series, Community Forum. I am Maritza Cruz. I am Director of Race and Gender Equity here at the YWCA. I will be the moderator for today's very important discussion on evolving queer Worcester. It will focus on themes of diversity in Worcester's LGBTQIA+ communities, highlighting the history of pride in Worcester, where we were, where we are now, and where are we going, especially in this uncertain future that we have here in our nation at this time. So thank you to all our panelists for being here with us this afternoon. And I will be introducing them, our distinguished panelists. And the first person I will introduce will be Al Green. For the past 5 years, Al Green has been the Ministry Director of LGBTQIA Asylum Task Force. It's a ministry of Hadley Park Congressional Church, UCC. The LGBT Asylum Task Force welcomes LGBTQ people of all faiths and traditions, providing housing, food, and connection to legal, medical, and mental resources at other local agencies. The asylum seekers are not allowed to work for up to 2 years when arriving here into the United States. So this vital ministry provides comprehensive support for the entire duration of the 2-year period in which it is needed. Al has assisted hundreds of LGBTQ asylum seekers to figure out a way to safely access housing, navigate the asylum process, gain employment, and assimilate to life in the United States or to adapt to life in the United States. Al is also a gay asylum seeker from Jamaica. He is a graduate of Worcester Polytech Institute, an avid swimmer, and a lover of all things food. Our second person, panelist, is Lamar Brown Noguera, they, them, co-owner of Queer on the Scene, a production and events group conceptualized by various Worcester queer community members, primarily committed to amplifying queer and BIPOC voices through local partnerships. For those of you who do not know what BIPOC is, it is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Queer on the Scene works with artists, scholars, organizers, and venues to produce queer inclusive spaces that house creative expression. The team is comprised of a group of individuals committed to the growth of a healthy, vibrant, and equitable queer community here. And this day job, Lamar works at AIDS Project Worcester. Leo Negron Cruz, Leo works at the Kennedy Community Health as a supervisor of community health workers. He has been an LGBTQ+ public health activist and educator for 30 years. He has been a board member of various community groups, the Worcester Gay and Lesbian Latino Organization, Central Mass Gay and Lesbian Coalition, HIV Consortium of Central Mass, among others. He is currently a member of the MDPH Latinx HIV/AIDS Advisory Group, the Latino History Project of Worcester. He was a member of the LGBTQ History Project Community Advisory Committee. He is originally from Puerto Rico, arriving in Worcester in 1985. He holds a med in health education from Worcester State University. And our fourth panelist, who is not on yet, hopefully she will be on, is Jolanda Walker, co-founder of Dance Away Sounds Production, with her wife of 16 years, dedicated to providing DJ services to the LGBTQ+ community for the last 12 years. She was a member of the Worcester Pride Committee, the logistics coordinator for Women of Color Weekend, a member of the QFlix Worcester Film Festival Committee, and also active in political campaigns. Jolanda is a paralegal at Ellison Associates, as well as a cycling instructor at the YMCA Incorporated. She was born and raised in Worcester. Her interests include outdoor activities, cycling, golf, and spending time with the family and making people happy through music. So welcome to our panelists, and thank you so much for being here with us and informing and educating the community, those who are present. So we would like to start and have Leo Negron Cruz really give us a brief history of here in Worcester, what the queer community, our pride, has been doing. I think people often come here and say, oh, there's nothing here in Worcester that's been done. Well, we have a lot of history. That's actually a lot of activists and a lot of people who have been involved in the work for the rights for the LGBTQIA plus community. Leo?
Yeah, thank you, Maritza, and welcome all. As you said, this is a very brief history of LGBTQ or queer history of Worcester. And this is kind of my take of that history in many ways. One thing I would say, I think queer individuals, queer people have been in these areas before this was Worcester. Then I think we need to recognize that to begin with. And then there's very little or no documentation perhaps of history. I think many times we look at history in the queer community since 1969 as the Stonewall. It's kind of before and after Stonewall. And then and Stonewall was is kind of what we label as the spark of the civil rights movements that we know today. And I think in many ways, it was a result of the civil rights movement in the United States that was part of it. Even the Stonewall started with what people would call a riot. Actually, patrons of a Stonewall in New York City responding to police harassment at the time, and then queer people of color actually kind of started those riots. And then in Worcester, we do know that there were documented some activities in Worcester before Stonewall, and there was I think a hotel called the Coronado Hotel on Franklin Street that used to advertise a men's bar and what is believed to be a code for gay men to gather and connect. And I think in a way that kind of set the tone in Worcester. I think Worcester, most of the LGBTQ or queer activity has been, or was mostly through bars. And also in private residences, most likely, but the documented information that we have seen is really based on bars, and then that's perhaps one of the first ones that we know. Then in the 60s, I think, and then that's also set the tone. I think in Worcester, my experience when I moved here was that really is a very vibrant LGBTQ or queer community, but is a little bit kind of closeted. I mean, now it's more visible than when I first moved here, but that then in the 60s was another bar called Port O'Call, and that probably existed before Stonewall, and then stay open, and that was on Main Street. And then there was one also in the in the 70s that was called Exit 2 on Main Street, and that then changed later the name to the Mailbox, and then that today we have the MB, which is the Mailbox, and probably that's the longest organization or the longest business, LGBTQ business in the city of Worcester. And that go back to the 1970s. We saw one way of putting, it was a lot of queer activity, but it was kind of hidden, and in many ways, so hidden from public view in general. There was a magazine in Boston that was actually printed in Worcester, but have no connection to Worcester other than it was printed here. And I think it was called the Fag Rag at the time. And then there was also then the other bad thing in the late 80s, then Club 241 opened. That was and then where the Mailbox was also in operation, and there were other ones here. Most of the activism, as we call it, probably comes out, and even for the responding to the AIDS epidemic, to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. That's when a lot of many of the things that probably we know today start happening. I mean, one of the highlights, I think, are the opening of the AIDS Friendly Worcester to provide services that started at the Packard Church in Auburn. I think in many ways was to serve mostly the queer community and the impact that HIV/AIDS had in the queer community, but it's serving everyone impacted by the AIDS epidemic. And during that time, also late in the 90s, was a group created that was called the Sexual Minority HIV/AIDS Task Force, and it was really looking at the response specifically to people in the category of sexual minority, which might, where we know today is the LGBTQ community. And then there was other activism, I think was in the 70s, was a group called Worcester Gay Union that was kind of an educational group, and even distribute card membership to individuals at the time. Then one that we hear a lot that started in 1993, one of the founding members was Al Tony, and Josephine Ross was they were the two first co-chairs of the Gay and Lesbian Community Coalition of Central Massachusetts that was then doing a little bit more social, but also political activism in the city. And then then in the late 80s and early 90s, Gay Pride kind of came back. I think the first Gay Pride in Worcester was in 1975, 5 years after Stonewall, at least the one that we have documentation of. And then from the 70s to the 90s, the 1970s to the 1990s, it didn't happen consistently, but at the end of the 80s and then the 90s, then it has been more consistent. And then has always been a very interesting, contentious group of people that get together to put together Pride. And then, as we know, then probably 2 years ago, the Worcester Pride Committee disbanded, and then the Queer Coalition took on organizing Pride. And I think that the Pride organizers for this year as well. And then there are currently, other than the Queer Coalition, is also, as mentioned already, queer on the scene, the Asylum, LGBTQ Asylum Task Force, and there are some others like Love Your Labels and some other organizations doing LGBTQ. One of them, for example, is the health center that I work, that has been designated kind of health equity for LGBTQ since 2014. And we know the city got that designation as a municipality a few years back. Then again, there's a kind of a new movement to them to be more visible in the community.
All right.
That's kind of my brief history lesson for the day.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's really important. And I think, one of the reasons we're doing this, this forum is to really showcase the diversity of activism and the diversity within the LGBTQ plus, or IA plus queer communities here in Worcester. So there's a lot of history. And if there's any missing history, I recommend that folks who may have something that's missing, let us know and actually send it to the Worcester Historical Museum so it can be archived under the project that has been done there, because that's ongoing, it's organic, so thank you so much. So I'm going to ask each one of the panelists to, and before, it would be remiss of me to not acknowledge that we always open acknowledging that we are on Nipmuc land. It's a Native American indigenous lands that we are on here, and we recognize that they are here and that they are present, and we need to acknowledge that unfortunately we were folks here were displaced and moved and their lands were stolen. So I'd like to ask each one of you, and I'd like to start off with, actually I'm going to have Al, if you can tell us about yourself, and each one of you will tell us a little bit about your journey here in Worcester, your activism in the work that you have done here. And I'd like for Al, if we can start with you.
Thank you, Maritza, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So I first came to Worcester in 2008 to attend WPI, where I studied civil engineering. Coming from Jamaica, and being present in the US as an immigrant was an interesting experience. You got to see all the beauty that the city of Worcester had on offer in terms of the food. I love food, and the different cultures that are present here. It was also great being able, as a gay man, for the first time to be out and to be myself. I had to return to Jamaica for a period and return to the closet. It was a horrible experience for me. I faced discrimination and I had a lot of difficulties, and so decided to return to Worcester in 2015 to seek asylum. When I returned, I was connected to the Highland Park Church and the LGBT Asylum Task Force there, where I was able to find community and fell in love with the work that the task force was doing. And so got really involved, was able to make connections, not just within the local immigrant asylum seeker community, but was able to also connect to other LGBTQ individuals and organizations that are doing a remarkable work within the city. It definitely sparked something in me. And so when the opportunity presented itself to lead the task force, I jumped on that, and I've loved it. I've loved being able to assist people to get acquainted with the various processes that are here, knowing what their rights are as asylum seekers, helping folks to find housing, to find employment, to basically cover all the topics that a newcomer and immigrant would need to know during their first few years here in the US. It's been an interesting journey, to say the least. Certainly a lot of challenges. Certainly having to deal with racism, having to deal with homophobia, transphobia, a lot of the issues that on the surface might not necessarily be as visible, right? We think that we're here in liberal Massachusetts, in Worcester, that receives 100 out of 100 score on the HRC index. But there are a lot of underlying issues that we face on a regular basis that a lot of folks might necessarily be aware of. And so it's been, like I said, quite an experience trying to navigate that and to fight for not just myself, but for my peers.
Thank you, Al. Leo, I'm going to jump to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and then as I said, I came to Worcester in 1985, directly from Utuado, Puerto Rico. At the time, I was already out, and then I came to Worcester in January, and then I found a very cold place, especially coming from the Caribbean, and then that's kind of the same that I felt the city was in terms of LGBTQ queer scene. You know, coming from home, then you come from a group of friends, a large group of friends that are out and about, and coming to Worcester with no one, then was a little bit kind of tough to then create and make connections. Then I think my first, that spring, probably summer, I to work met someone and they invited me to go over to MB, and then that's how I then became acquainted with the queer community in Worcester. You know, like probably a lot of other people through a bar in many ways. And then you start then developing new friendships, but then it was really, you know, you come to kind of a white environment. Then back home, my group of friends were men and women, and I don't remember anyone coming out as transgender at the time, at least. But then again, and then come here, and then it's really just boys, you know, and then that was kind of some of the many cultural shocks that when we have, it's really like this segregation by gender in many ways within the LGBTQ community. And then I started doing HIV work as a volunteer, and then that led to become activist in in health and public health in that realm. And then out of that, then came realization that most of the work, even I was doing work within the Latino community, was mostly not, the HIV work was not reaching the LGBTQ within the Latino community. And then that led to the creation of what then was called the Gay and Lesbian Latino Organization. And it was really in response to not having any response in the HIV epidemic from people doing work in the Latino community, but also when you look at what was done in the gay community, was really also geared towards white gay men. And then and then the bars in the area also, I remember going to 241, for example, and then there was the Latino corner that we would be, most of us would be kind of sectioned to one part of the, and then there was a woman's corner in the other side. But then again, then we realized that many other Latino queers didn't have a sense of community, and then part of that group was to create that, to help people to make connections with one another. And then that we started that in 1989, and then in 1993 I joined the group that was organizing the Gay and Lesbian Community Coalition of Central Mass, and then I was on the board of directors for many years. And then again, it was the same. It's really to make sure that many of the voices within our community are included in conversations and different groups about it.
Thank you, Leo. I think that's one of the things oftentimes that people don't realize, the intersectionalities of race, with the queer LGBTQ+IA communities, and left out. So out of need, things were created and arise, and that's, a good thing that it happened. But that's something that people who also are not white and are the queer community have to deal with also, the intersectionality of also homophobia and racism. So Lamar, please tell us about yourself and your journey.
So where do I start? I'm also from the Caribbean, so we're all Caribbean people living far north. So of course, it took some time to get used to the weather here. So I got here in 2014. I was visiting on a visitor's visa for the holiday. I worked in the hospitality industry back home in Jamaica, and I had no idea about asylum seeking when I came here in the first place. But while I was here, much like Al, I realized the ability to be more yourself and free. And I have a very androgynous kind of presentation that had always been something reserved back home. But it also was something a lot of folks always noticed about me. And sometimes it turns positive, especially for visitors, Americans mostly, who kind of like how happy and go lucky I come off. So for me, being able to practice that more often than not was very attractive in a sense. And once I found out about asylum seeking, I decided to investigate a little more and went ahead and made that choice of not returning home. And I've been here since then. I moved to Worcester April of 2014, and it's like AIDS Project Worcester and myself were a match made in heaven, as back home I was a part of the Sandals International Resorts Foundation, and I was assigned to HIV/AIDS response, and I went to a hospice care facility, and for the day I was, partnered with a specific patient there. And we spent the entire day together talking. And she said at the end of the day, she's like, there's something about you should never let anyone take away from you. You're a people person, and she says, go out there and keep changing people's lives. And when I got here, I just ended up falling into a group of individuals who were already connected to AIDS Project Worcester. So when the opportunity came up for working for AIDS Project Worcester, I was like, yeah. And I put my application in, and before you know it, I've been here for the last 8 years, doing more and, growing as a professional and as an activist. For my work, I do mostly community impact and youth engagement here at ACE Project Worcester. On my community impact side, it's a lot of program planning, ensuring that our clients and consumers are aware of what's happening, events and community interactions, more activism, working with like the Worcester Historical Museum on the LGBTQ History Project, doing outreach and canvassing in the community. When the COVID pandemic came on, I was one of the state Stop the Spread site managers, especially for our Worcester site and our Marlborough site. And, I'm very proud of the experience I got from that and the additional exposure that ACE Project Worcester got, because so many folks were like, oh, you've been around? And we're like, yeah, we've been here for like 30 years. And, a lot of folks did not know that we were the same persons who did those things back then and still keep doing those things and more for our community. And I think that's one of the unique things about myself and ACE Project Worcester. We see where there's a need and we step up and we plan and we, sometimes we're stretched thin, but we know the community needs us. And the same thing happened with Queer the Scene. It was from a casual conversation of a group of friends sitting at a table and all kind of having the same idea, not knowing that you had the same idea. And we're like, there's not much that happens, especially that, as immigrants coming from outside and also people of color, we find that when we go into a lot of spaces, there wasn't really a space made for us, whether it's the music or just the dress code sometimes, or just, the way people interact with you or stare at you. You were humbly aware that you weren't as fully accepted or a part of that space. And with that said, we're like, we need to start queering the scene. And here we are. Queer the Scene is a whole LLC helping to plan Worcester Pride. Outside of that, I've worked with quite a few different agencies, including Fenway, the Boston Public Health Commission as a part of their Ryan-wide Planning Council that manages like 30-something million that come into the state to support HIV positive individuals. And, I've gotten a few awards over the time, not to brag on myself, but I think it's also a highlight of how much impact Worcester has had on me as a person and given me so much opportunity to help and support others. And for that, I'm always going to be grateful to Worcester. I always tell the story that on my way coming into Worcester, one of the first visual signs I can remember is seeing the Union Station, but then right after that, I saw the rainbow flag flying over MB. And for me, that has always been my signal of your home kind of thing. No matter where I'm coming from, once I see that, there's just this relief that comes over my entire being. And for that, I've always been grateful to have, the community that I've been able to found here. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Lamar. So my next question is, what defines for each one of you evolving queer Worcester? What does that mean? Anyone can answer, whoever wants to go first.
I guess I could probably go first. For me, I would say evolving queer Worcester, it's somewhat happening. I think it's a natural process of the queer community. We have always been some of the most critical of our own self and have a very inter-reflecting kind of ability, hence the alphabet soup we have, where we are willing to recognize when, there's something different, there's space that needs to be created for others, and, we are willing to advocate and create that space. I've always said that the queer movement is one that, is reflective of the utmost sacrifice of being willing to, sometimes give up of your own freedom and your own space to be able to accommodate others. And even just the using of the word queer, it's a very more recent thing. I've had conversations with individuals from, older generation who still has some trauma around it. But then I work with youth who have a complete different idea of what queer means. For them, it's that word that removes all the corners in the boxes and kind of smooths it out into a more circular thing. You can be yourself, you can express yourself in whatever makes you most comfortable and most authentic. And I feel like that's how we are able to evolve what Queer Worcester is going to be, being able to have individuals like myself and Alan, Leo and David and Josh and, the entire group of LGBTQ people who are constantly living their truest and most authentic self in public eye, and being able to give that to our community, say you can be your full self within this space, within this community. I feel like that's how we evolve Queer Worcester.
Thank you. And I love that analogy of removing the corners and smoothing it out into a circle. It's beautiful. Thank you for that. Who's next? Al, Leo?
I can go next. Yeah, I mean, the word evolving, right? That's an action, it's ongoing. And that's how I see the queer community in Worcester in its movement. We oftentimes, when we think of evolution, we're thinking of moving towards some end product. But really and truly, we're not exactly, and some think that we're actually at that end product already. But there's just so much more work that needs to be done. It's almost generational, right? Where we point to certain things that we've been able to accomplish. So whether it be equal marriage or the fact that we're able to have a gay bar in Worcester that's been around for decades, or the fact that we're able to walk into certain spaces and to be ourselves. But I always like to look back at how it is that the Pride movement started, right? It really was a fight for the rights of marginalized people. The queer community as a whole, but others within the community, or trans community, or Black and brown members of the queer community. And I view what we are all doing, right? Like Lamar pointed out, all the folks that are working with the Queer Coalition towards making the community refocused on supporting the marginalized people who are within our community, because there's just so much more work to be done.
Thank you, Al.
Yeah, and I think when I look at the evolving, I think piggybacking on what Al just mentioned, I think looking at the way that Pride is organized these days, it's really bringing many of the different voices within our community, the queer community in Worcester. Then that always remind me a story that I've told probably many times. In the early years of the Pride committee, I remember vividly that the Latino individuals, Latino groups were not invited to be part of the planning of Pride, even though people in the planning committee knew many Latino queer individuals, but we are not invited until the end, when they needed a picture for one of the newspapers in the for an article that they wanted to make sure that has some color in it, even though the picture would be black and white, but they wanted to reflect the color. And then we resisted in being part of the Latino group that I was part of, to be part of the picture. And then we were accused, of where our loyalty, are we gay or are we Latinos, and like that's kind of a way of splitting oneself in, then there's almost, there's no way for us to do it then. But now I think as the time move, and I think is a kind of that generational shift in many ways, that we recognize that when you are talking about a community as diverse as the queer community in Worcester and everywhere, but in Worcester, you need to have many voices, either marginalized voices, or, you know, there is not only one specific voice that you need all of them to be able to create, as you are copying the term that you always use, Maritza, the queer communities rather than just one community, right? Mm-hmm. And these different groups make one bigger community, and then we all needs to be included. And definitely there's a lot of more work to be done, but I think that's the part. But also, as we move away from the bar scenes in many ways, you know, because I think there are more opportunities to socialize and to connect that are not necessarily a bar or a club, then I think you need to then start also creating new spaces for people to congregate and socialize. I think most people do it to social media these days, but there's also some need for the physical. And then one of the things that I enjoyed last year at Pride was that really you could feel that many of the voices were included in the planning and carry on Pride as in previous year, even though I have this enjoyed Pride before, but I think it has a different taste last year. And I'm looking forward for this year.
Wonderful. And it shows you how that evolving, it's continuous. You know, I agree with you, Al. It's not, there's no end product. The end product is actually equality, equity, justice, and fairness, because that's what we all seek, but that's ongoing. My next question is, you know, we are living in very, you know, precarious times, okay, here in this country. You know, constitutional rights are being overturned and ended, like we saw with the 14th Amendment for women. You know, other fought hard rights are being looked at. And one of them is actually, which may be coming down the pike, is like, for example, same-sex marriage. You know, it is being targeted to be overturned. And it's not that long ago that actually was, you know, in many states legalized and in this country. With all of this that's happening, all this uncertainty, what do you see for the future of not only, you know, queer Worcester, but in our country? What do you see? What are your concerns, you know? Because again, you know, we're living, I think none of us ever expected to see some of the things that are being overturned happening, and it's happening, so. But what do you see here in Worcester? And you can't separate that from the, you know, nationals.
Should I go again first?
Oh, go for it.
Yeah.
So definitely, I think it's gonna be a difficult time for a lot of us. And something that Leo mentioned was, you know, that idea that sometimes as queer people of color and Black queer folks, we are almost charged with separating ourselves from one identity for the other in a sense of trying to fight for the same equal rights and equality. Especially as a Black person in America, you know, our fight and struggle becomes double that of some other members of the LGBTQ community. And I think in 2020, that's one of the things that came to a head. And that's why, you know, you have so many Pride organizations that went under, because for too long as queer people, we were okay with the idea of being accepted only, being tolerated. And I think that's one of the things we have to change as a community and as activists, that it's not about being accepted or tolerated. We need to start demanding that this space is authentically ours. It's not, we're not asking you to accept who we are. We're just telling you who we are, and expect that sense of respect for who we are. And I feel like that's the fight that's going to happen next. You know, rights are something that once you have it, it's still, there's still a battle to maintain it. And I feel like we became complacent with what we have achieved so far. And as an activist, I'm already gearing up for the next fight, the next battle. And we have to understand that it's never gonna stop unless we continue protecting, you know, the most vulnerable among us, the most impressionable. You know, for example, I work in the youth community, and for me, a lot of that is reinforcing their own confidence in themselves, so that they never have to experience the idea of seeing being queer as a disadvantage, or you know, or a vulnerability, or an exclusion, or something that needs to be included, because you are valid already. You are a full, authentic person. However you look, however you sound, however you love, you are a valid person. And I think that's one of the most impactful work I can do with my own self. And I feel like I can challenge all queer folks who know other queer folks to just be at the table for that person, you know, be that, you know, silent, sometimes, you know, just living your most authentic self is already activism. There's some of us who will go out there on the picket line. There's some of us who will work in the background, and there's some of us who just continue living as our authentic self. And I believe we're all activists. We're all doing the good work to continuously grow and motivate our community. So don't look at an Al or a Lamar just because we're out there and we're, you know, we're pushing on the front line. You can still be a part of this movement by just being yourself, being authentic, you know, supporting another queer person. Don't just like that Black trans woman photo online. Speak up for her. If someone says something against her, speak up for her. That's how you practice real, even like allyship. You know, we have to understand that it's a practicing thing. You know, just like evolving, it's a continuous effort in learning and growing and, you know, reinforcing that you believe in this, you believe in this community and the success that it should have and should achieve.
Thank you.
I might just jump on to co-sign what all of what Lamar just said, right? Yeah, we have become complacent in thinking that, okay, yes, we've reached this mountaintop, and there isn't much more work that's left to be done. But also, as Lamar said, right, we need to all remain active, remain vigilant, right? Even just sitting out one election, right, has repercussions for generations, right? And so whatever it is that you can do at this moment, not in the future, I don't think that you have to also be moving mountains by yourself, but any little act that you can do to support progressive causes for the community is very, very, very important. There are a lot of entities that are doing very important work within the city of Worcester. And I implore each of you who is listening in to get involved in some way, right? Find a nonprofit that is dear to your heart and is doing the work, and volunteer there or support the work that they're doing. As for my vision for the queer community in Worcester, I see it as one that is moving towards greater inclusivity for the diverse population. As Leo mentioned, right, just even in terms of the Pride offerings and how those have changed, is making a huge impact in making spaces for all members of the local queer community. I'll put in a plug at this point. We have Pride Worcester, September 2nd to the 11th this year. And we have a whole host of activities that are planned, from a fashion show to multiple different genres and types of parties to different organizations having their Pride days, to youth prom, to having sober events. The main festival will actually take place on Saturday, September 10th. And yeah, we're hoping that everyone will get involved in and attend these various activities. because in providing and showing your support, right, we're able to continue this work and provide very valuable feedback so that the community and the organizers can know the direction that you as the community would like us to go in. The events will be posted on our website soon, but the website for this year's Pride is prideworcester.org, and I invite everyone to visit that at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then my 2 cents to it, though, is that, as you mentioned, the struggle for equality continues. And then, as we know, and I mean, this past month probably is a good proof of it. You know, the Supreme Court decisions these days has make all of us wonder, you know, and the stupid fight that this guy has with the school about flags, you know, and then really continue to show that that struggles is real, and we need to continue. Then also that when we're talking about civil rights for the queer community, we're talking about civil rights for men, women, is the struggle for the gender equality, class equality. I mean, it's when you look at it, it's not because all of these other groups are part of the queer community as well. Then I've been fighting for equal marriage, you know. Then yeah, it's a big fight, but also fighting for better education system that really teach our kids, you know, real history. Then that's part of the LGBTQ fight as well, because as in school, when they exclude one group, they always exclude us. We're never included as queer individuals. And then there are many that have contributed to this country and to literature, to science, to many other things. And then I think that we need to continue making sure that our struggle is not only to be able to do this or that, but it's also to really be included. And then that include everyone that is within our community, that I think many times we do forget. I mean, that example that I point out about Pride and the Latino group, I think we still see it many times, you know. That's not really a gay issue, that's someone else's issue. Say no, it's a gay issue because that someone else could be gay, and that you know, gay individuals or queer individuals that also struggle with that. Then again, and economic opportunities is for all of us, regardless of gender identity and sexual orientation, right? Then again, then all those struggles are part of ours, and I think bringing and making sure that the diverse voices within our community are represented in decision-making bodies within our community and the larger community is important. And then that's how that struggle, you know, we should be, you know, making sure as that we partake in the political process, and making sure that that we elect individuals that are going to really support us in the long run, not only during, you know, that then we could hold them accountable in many ways. And then that's the part I think that we need to continue. It's not just because we attain this level of rights or recognize these rights that we inherited have, that there are more to it, but also there are other people that we need to join with them and do that fight as well.
So the message here is that this is ongoing. It's an ongoing fight. It's an ongoing battle. It's an ongoing to be vigilant for all the hard work that has been done, where we have arrived to a certain point. We can't rest. And that's the message. We have to be vigilant and continue with that fight because it's very easily can be taken away. And some of us haven't even reached those rights yet. So, you know, those intersectionalities that come in, you know, again, you know, to showcase the diversity within the queer LGBTQIA plus communities, that intersectionality of race and gender and you know, class and so on. You know, we have to stay vigilant and stay involved. So I have a question, and then we'll be closing out. The question is, how can Worcester's queer community provide greater opportunities for combating social isolation for LGBTQIA plus elders? How can we better reach these populations? Would like to take that on. Well,
Well, I mean, I would say I think part of that evolving, as I said, I think we in 2021, I think most people connect through social media, and then it's not really in person, and then COVID came and then make it even worse. And I think some of the work needs to be done then is with the organizations serving elderly and older individuals, then to make sure that they develop the expertise on how to outreach and connect and bring people, queer people, older queer people into their programming, and then queer organizations, then we need to make sure that also open the door for, you know, ageism is a real thing, and then that we organizations, we I'm referring here to queer organizations, also then open their doors and get the expertise for the agencies like Elder Services, the Age Center, the Senior Center, all of those that really then build those collaborations, those bridges and collaborations to make sure that then we are not only reaching those that have a smartphone that could connect to social media. I mean, I would know that many of the elderly LGBTQ people, queer people, have access to that, but also there's some of the levels of isolation that then we need to work at it. And we might not have the expertise of working with elderly individuals, but we might have some level of expertise working with queer individuals. And then I think it's looking at how we could collaborate with agencies that are already designed to work with elderly individuals.
I think, you know, and I completely agree with that. I think it's really, you know, now that we have, you know, in our nation, especially with the, you know, social, the racial unrest that has happened, that has really pushed to the forefront, you know, race equity and, you know, putting that into the systems, putting that into organizations, making that part of your organization. The same thing needs to be done to address, you know, LGBTQIA plus communities. You know, those organizations that are out there servicing people, they need to incorporate that lens into the services that they're providing. And you know what, and elders are excluded. You know, one thing I like to say, like all the time, is that, you know, we rely on social media for so much, but older people don't go on social media. Older people actually would prefer mailing, saying, look, you know, and people read their mail. You know, this is what's happening, you know, do that. You know, you have to be very intentional to really create that outreach, you know, to those isolated populations. Did you want to say, add something, Al?
I was just going to point folks to one entity that's aiming to support the elderly LGBTQ community, and that's Outstanding Life, outstandinglife.org. Folks can visit their website for more information.
All right, thank you so much. So we have come to the end of our community forum. I want to say thank you so much to you know, Lamar and Al and Lil for being here with us and educating us and providing all this information to us out here in the community. I very much appreciate it. And I want to thank each and every one of the participants that attended this forum. Please be on the lookout for something that we will want to continue doing. We'll also be sending an email to all of you with a survey to kind of ask you, what would you like to see regarding more forums, you know, happening here through the YWCA of Central Massachusetts, because this is our mission. Our mission is to, you know, eliminate racism, which I know we can't do, but we can dismantle it. And also, you know, gender equity and having a dignified life for all of us. So the work is real. We'll continue to do it. Please do fill out that survey. And thank you for being here with us. And I look forward to seeing all of you at our next community forum around race and gender equity. Thank you so much. Please take care and be well.